Hey, YouTube fam. Have you ever heard a story where a prince has to run away, a shepherd becomes a hero? This is about a man who talked to a burning bush, parted the sea, and showed holy rules. Not a film script, but Moses' real miraculous journey. Join me as we explore and see how his great trust and leadership made a big difference in the world. Meet Moses, a man who was born in Egypt where there are big pyramids, mysterious sphinx statues, and powerful kings near the Nile River. Moses was a Hebrew, born in a way where he was placed in a basket and set to float on the Nile River. Moses was born around the 13th century before the Common Era. At that time, the Pharaoh of Egypt had ordered that all newborn Hebrew boys be killed to decrease the population of the Israelites. The Pharaoh was worried that the growing population of the Israelites could become a threat. To save her son Jochebed, Moses' mother, hid him in a waterproofed basket and placed it among the tall grasses by the side of the Nile River. After Moses was placed in the basket and set adrift in the Nile by his mother, he was discovered by Pharaoh's daughter. She found the baby while she was bathing in the river, took pity on him, and decided to adopt him. Moses' sister Miriam, who had been watching from afar, approached Pharaoh's daughter and suggested that Moses' own mother, Jochebed, nurse the child. Pharaoh's daughter agreed, not knowing that Jochebed was Moses' mother. So Moses grew up in the Egyptian royal house, getting an education fit for a prince. At the same time, he stayed connected to his Hebrew background through his birth mother. As Moses grew up in the Egyptian royal household, he became aware of his Hebrew heritage. He faced an internal conflict that reached its peak when he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave. Moved by a sense of justice and connection to his people, Moses intervened and killed the Egyptian. Fearing the consequences of his action, he fled from Egypt to the land of Midian. There he settled as a shepherd, marrying Zipporah, the daughter of Jethro, a Midianite priest. This period in Midian was a significant turning point in Moses' life, setting the stage for his eventual return to Egypt and his role in leading the Israelites to freedom. One night, while Moses looking after his sheep near Mount Horeb, also called the Mountain of God, he saw a bush that was burning but not being destroyed by the fire. Interested in this strange sight, Moses went closer to take a look. At that time, God spoke to Moses from the bush, commanding him to return to Egypt to lead the Israelites out of slavery. This moment was a big turning point in Moses' life, transforming him from a shepherd into a leader and prophet. It was this special meeting with God that started Moses on his journey to face the Pharaoh and free the Israelites from slavery, a journey filled with challenges and miracles. With his mission from God, Moses went back to Egypt. After arrived in Egypt, Moses and his brother Aaron faced the Pharaoh and asked him to let the Israelites go. Since the Pharaoh kept saying no, God caused 10 terrible plagues that got worse each time. The first plague was that the Nile and all water sources in Egypt turned to blood, killing fish and making the water undrinkable. The second plague was an invasion of frogs, which covered the land and entered houses and bedrooms. The third plague was when dust turned into gnats or lice, bothering both people and animals. The fourth plague was when swarms of flies invaded Egyptian homes and land. The fifth plague was a deadly disease that killed many Egyptian livestock. The sixth plague brought painful boils and sores to the Egyptians. The seventh plague was a destructive hailstorm that damaged crops and property. The eighth plague saw swarms of locusts eating any remaining crops and plants. The ninth plague brought thick darkness that covered Egypt for 3 days. The 10th and final plague resulted in the death of the firstborn in every Egyptian family, including animals. The sequence of plagues ultimately led the Pharaoh to release the Israelites. Moses then led the Israelites out of Egypt. But soon after their departure, Pharaoh changed his mind and pursued them with his army. This led to the dramatic moment at the Red Sea, where Moses, by God's command, parted the waters, allowing the Israelites to cross safely. When the Egyptian army chased them, the water came back and covered them. This event was the final moment that freed the Israelites from being slaves in Egypt and showed God's power in their journey. Following the miraculous crossing of the Red Sea, Moses led the Israelites into the wilderness. After that, they traveled towards Mount Sinai, where Moses received the 10 Commandments from God. This event was when God made an agreement with the Israelites. They talked about rules and instructions for how the Israelites should live in their society. After that, they kept going towards the promised land that God promised them. But it took a long time because they faced problems, and sometimes didn't have faith in God. They had to cross deserts, climb mountains, and deal with harsh conditions. At times they ran out of food and water, and this made them worried. Sometimes the Israelites forgot about the promise God had made to them, and they lost their trust in Him. They complained and doubted if they would ever reach the land that God had said would be theirs. They wished they were back in Egypt, even though they were slaves there. Moses had to act as a mediator between the people and God. When they were hungry, he prayed to God for food and manna, a kind of bread-like food that appeared miraculously on the ground every morning. God also sent quail for meat. When they were thirsty, he struck a rock and water miraculously flowed from it. During this time, the Israelites built something very special called the tabernacle. Think of it like a big, movable tent. His tabernacle had a special purpose. It was meant to be a place where the Israelites could connect with and worship God. The tabernacle was like a symbol that showed God was with them during their journey through the wilderness. Inside this tent, there were specific things they used for rituals and ceremonies to show their respect and love for God. Despite all the challenges, Moses remained a strong and reliable leader. He continued to guide the Israelites on their journey towards the Promised Land. However, because the people collectively disobeyed God at one point, the journey ended up taking 40 years. During this time, a whole generation of Israelites passed away, including Moses. The reason why they can't get through the Promised Land is because they are impatient and disobedient. At that time, Moses had sent 12 spies into the land to see what it was like. When the spies returned, 10 of them gave a negative report, saying that the people living there were strong and their cities were fortified. This made the Israelites very fearful, and they did not believe they could conquer the land with God's help. Only 2 of the spies, Joshua and Caleb, had faith in God's promise and believed that they could take the land. However, the majority of the Israelites listened to the fearful report and rebelled against God. They even talked about going back to Egypt, forgetting all the miracles God had performed to set them free. Because of this collective act of disobedience and lack of faith, God became angry and punished the Israelites. He declared that the current generation, those who had doubted and rebelled, would not enter the Promised Land. Instead, they would wander in the wilderness for 40 years until that entire generation had passed away. Only their children, who had not been part of the rebellion, would eventually enter the land. If we asked why couldn't Moses also go inside the Promised Land? The reason Moses can't go to the Promised Land is because of an incident known as the Water of Meribah. The Israelites were once again facing a shortage of water, and they began to complain and quarrel with Moses and Aaron, blaming them for the lack of water. God told Moses and Aaron to talk to a rock and make water come out for the people. However, in his frustration with the complaining Israelites, Moses made a mistake. Instead of talking to the rock like God told him to, Moses hit it twice with his staff to make water come out. While water did indeed come out, God was displeased with Moses for not following his specific command. God saw this as a lack of trust and obedience on Moses' part. Because of this disobedience, God informed Moses that he would not be allowed to lead the Israelites into the Promised Land. God told him, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." As the journey continued, Moses' leadership remained strong until the end of his life. He knew that his time was coming to an end, and he passed on his leadership to Joshua, who would lead the Israelites into the Promised Land after Moses' death. Moses died on Mount Nebo, overlooking the promised land, as God had told him he would not enter it. Bible tells us that God buried Moses himself, and no one knows the exact location of his burial to this day. The story of the Israelites continued as they faced new challenges and victories in their journey towards establishing their homeland. What a fantastic Bible journey we've had, following the remarkable life of Moses. From a simple shepherd to an extraordinary leader, his story is filled with faith, hope, and unique events that inspire us all. Stay tuned for more exciting stories from the Bible, where belief, hope, and courage continue to change lives. Remember to like, follow, and share to keep Moses' enduring spirit alive in your heart and mind.